What happens inside an avoidant woman after she hurts a good man? There is a very specific silence that follows after an avoidant woman hurts a good man. And it's not the kind of silence people imagine. It isn't peaceful. It isn't empowering. It isn't clarity. It's the quiet after the nervous system finally stops running. The moment when there's no argument left, no message to ignore, no emotional intensity to react against. And in that stillness, something begins to surface that she has spent most of her life avoiding. Because hurting a good man doesn't just end a relationship, it activates fears she can't distract herself from anymore. At first, she feels relief, and this part matters. When she pulls away, creates distance, or emotionally shuts down, her body relaxes. The pressure is gone. The expectations disappear. The closeness that felt overwhelming fades into space. She tells herself she did the right thing, that she chose herself, that she needed freedom. But relief is not resolution. It's temporary regulation. And once the relief wears off, the deeper fear begins to rise. Because what she escaped from wasn't danger. It was intimacy. One of the first fears that creeps in is the fear of self-recognition. A good man doesn't explode, manipulate, or chase endlessly. He doesn't punish her for leaving. He steps back with dignity. And that calm exit is unsettling. There's no villain to point to, no chaos to justify the withdrawal. And suddenly she's left alone with a realization that feels threatening. Nothing was wrong, except my ability to stay. That awareness cuts deeper than guilt, because guilt can be numbed, but self-recognition demands change. She fears realizing that she didn't lose you because you were inadequate, but because you were emotionally safe. And emotional safety is unfamiliar terrain for an avoidant. Chaos feels predictable. Distance feels controllable. But calm love requires presence. It requires staying open when the instinct is to shut down. Hurting a good man exposes the gap between who she wants to be and who she actually is in relationships. And that gap is uncomfortable to sit with. Another fear emerges quietly, the fear that this loss is permanent. Avoidants often assume connections are elastic, that people will stay available even if pushed away, that emotional doors don't really close. But when a good man is hurt deeply, something shifts inside him. He doesn't become cold, he becomes clear. His energy withdraws, his availability disappears, and she senses it, not through words but through absence. And the fear hits. What if this isn't temporary? What if I don't get access to this kind of love again? She also fears the long-term echo of comparison. Because after a good man, other connections feel different. On the surface, they may feel easier, less intense, less demanding, but they also feel emptier. Conversations don't linger. Emotional exchanges lack depth. There's less emotional intelligence, less attunement, less warmth. And she starts comparing, not consciously at first, but emotionally. She remembers how it felt to be deeply understood without having to perform. And that memory doesn't fade. It sharpens. One of her deepest fears is that she now knows what she lost. Before, she could dismiss it as not the right fit or bad timing. But once you've experienced healthy love, you can't unknow it. And that awareness creates discomfort in future relationships. Because she knows what could exist, but also knows she wasn't able to sustain it. And that knowledge quietly erodes the narrative she once relied on to protect herself. She fears that hurting a good man exposed her emotional limits. A good man doesn't demand vulnerability, he invites it. He creates space for it. And when she couldn't meet him there, it revealed a painful truth. Intimacy isn't just something she avoids, it's something she doesn't fully know how to hold. And that realization threatens her self-image. Avoidants often see themselves as independent, strong, and self-contained. But hurting someone who loved them well reveals unresolved wounds they've learned to hide. There's also a fear tied to your healing. This part is rarely talked about. When you stop reaching out, stop reacting, stop seeking validation or closure, something destabilizes her internally. Your emotional availability was a safety net, even when she pushed against it. And when that net disappears, she feels the absence. Not necessarily because she wants the relationship back, but because she no longer has emotional access to someone who saw her with softness. She fears becoming irrelevant in your emotional world. And that fear isn't about ego, it's about attachment. Being remembered keeps her connected to the past without having to confront it. When she senses that you've moved on internally, not just externally, it forces her to face the consequences of her choices without the cushion of your emotional presence. Another fear rises slowly, the fear that love didn't overwhelm her. Her fear did. This is a painful realization because it reframes the entire story she tells herself. The relationship wasn't too much. The man wasn't demanding. The intimacy wasn't unsafe. Her nervous system simply didn't know how to remain open when things became real. And that awareness brings grief, not just for the relationship, but for all the connections she may have sabotaged before. She also fears repeating the same pattern, because once you see the cycle, you can't unsee it. The excitement, the closeness, the discomfort, the withdrawal, the justification, the loss. Hurting a good man forces her to confront the fact that avoidance has a cost, and that cost accumulates. But changing the pattern requires emotional work, vulnerability, and facing old wounds. And that is the very thing she has spent her life avoiding. There is fear in knowing that if she doesn't heal, she will continue to lose meaningful connections, not because people leave her, but because she leaves herself. And that realization can feel overwhelming. So sometimes she chooses numbness over growth, distance over introspection, familiar loneliness over unfamiliar healing. She fears that you now see her clearly, not as mysterious, not as misunderstood, but as emotionally unavailable. A good man tends to see potential. He gives the benefit of the doubt. He believes in growth. When that lens breaks, she loses a version of herself that felt admired and safe. Being seen clearly can feel threatening when you haven't yet faced your wounds. And this leads to one of her most profound fears, that losing you meant something, that it wasn't just a relationship, it was a turning point, that she didn't just hurt a man, but missed an opportunity to experience love without games, emotional armor, or power struggles. And sitting with that truth brings grief, not loud grief, but quiet, lingering grief that shows up in moments of reflection, late nights, and emotional emptiness. This is why avoidant women sometimes return long after the relationship ends. Not because they've healed, not because they suddenly understand love, but because fear has matured into longing, and longing feels safer than vulnerability. Reaching out allows her to test whether the door is still open, whether the good man she hurt is still emotionally available enough to soften the regret without demanding transformation. But here is the truth that matters most, especially if you were that good man. She doesn't fear losing love. She fears becoming someone who can't sustain it. Hurting you forced her to confront that possibility. And whether she faces it or runs from it, that fear stays with her. Your consistency didn't scare her because it was weak. It scared her because it was real. And the fear she carries now isn't proof of your absence. It's proof of your impact.